Welcome, everyone. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. We are going to be talking about African American newspapers and specifically a couple of databases that we have in the collection here. So I really hope that everybody has access to these databases, but I will tell you some tips and tricks on how to get a hold of different newspapers as you are interested in them. Now, something I would love for you guys to do is if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and I will be happy to answer them at the end of the presentation. So with the handout, I did give you some background, a little bit of information. I wanted to just kind of introduce the concept of newspapers and talking about the fact that they've been in the US for quite some time, since 1690. But mostly 1700s. But it wasn't until in 1827 that the first African American newspaper in the US was originated. So that would be the first one that we could potentially use for research for African American newspapers. Now, the caveat I want to give is that you will want to look in any newspaper. You don't want to just look at a specific ethnic newspaper. You want to look at every newspaper that covers the area in which you are researching, because you never know where the information will lie. And what's really interesting is newspapers are truly basically the social media of the past. They're going to talk about all of the newsy bits that are going on. So who stepped out with who's leaving town, who's buying what property, who's made the news in any which way. And it's going to have the legal notices, it's going to have vital statistics, it's going to have just a little bit of everything, because this was the means of communication. And it's a really good opportunity to not only look at or look for the records to fill in the blanks of genealogical research that you're trying to fill with those vital records. Maybe you can't find birth or death records because they don't exist yet. So you're trying to find other pieces of proof, or you're trying to add more of that meat to the bones of your family tree. You're trying to find more information to add to that story, because our ancestors were more than just names and dates and places. They had lives, they lived, they did really cool and unique things. And newspapers are a great opportunity to look for that information. I really like this quote: "The newspaper is a greater treasure to the people than uncounted millions of gold." So that can be taken in many different ways, but the way I like to take it from the genealogical stance is that it is a great treasure to people to have that information, to be able to find information on our ancestors and on other people in the community, on the history and societal norms, and any sort of insights that we can find into our families. So I want to go ahead and find my mouse. There we go. We want to understand. We want to understand what the importance is. So it is an often overlooked resource, not just African American newspapers, but newspapers in general. So you want to make sure that you are looking through newspapers and understanding the importance of the African American newspapers. Okay, well, those newspapers are going to be more specific. They're going to have more specific pieces of information for that culture, for that group of people. And it's going to fill in those holes of research, and we want to utilize that information. The very first database that we're going to take a look at is Accessible Archives African American Newspapers. And I'm going to go ahead and bring this over so you guys can see. We are going to get into the database through the Genealogy Center website. Now, you do have to be on site to access these newspapers, and that means physically in the building at one of the Allen County Public Library locations. So it could be the main branch where the Genealogy Center is, or it could be at any of the other branches around the county. You just need to be on site. You can be on your own computer, you can be on one of ours, but this information is one of those. Now, that being said, many of these newspapers that we're going to talk about are out of copyright. So you might be able to find them in other locations, and we will discuss other options on finding these newspapers a little bit towards the end. We're going to have to go to our resources. So you can get there through two different ways: Explore Genealogy, our resources, or the purple button that turns green down here, purpley pink, whatever color that is. Once you click on that, you have the option to go to the free databases, which are ones that you can access from anywhere in the world, or the on-site databases, which you physically have to be on site for. And we're going to go ahead and start with this Accessible Archives African American Newspapers. I'm going to go ahead and open link a new tab so I can keep this page open to come back to. When you click on it, you're going to see that you come to a page that says Coherent Digital, and it's a little bit different. That is because Accessible Archives has been bought, and it's not the same access link that it used to be. So once you're here on our site, I want to give you all the breadcrumbs. Eventually, this will be changed because as this website changes, as the link changes, it'll be updated. And to be perfectly honest, we're updating our own website and catalog, and it'll all be brand new on October 31st. So this just won't be changed before then. But if you go to Products and Accessible Archives, that'll take you to the Accessible Archives database access, and you click on the button and it takes you straight there. Now, the thing to note is that it's searching all of the publications that we have through Accessible Archives. And so that's everything that was originally in the African American newspaper data set and more. Now, you can see what exactly is in there by browse the archives or view collections. If we scroll down a little bit, you can actually do a search history, etc. But let's go ahead and play around with this a little bit because I want you guys to see how you can find specific pieces of information. So with the view collections, it's going to open up a little bit more information on each section. So, okay, the one that we have is African American newspapers. This is the one that we expected to be searching. So as we open that up, we're going to get a guide to that specific collection. And so this original database with all of these publication titles and you have these different parts will make a little bit more sense once you're in here. Now, does it make 100% sense? I'm going to say no, because I didn't understand why there was part 1 to part 2, part 3, etc. It's just their organizational style. Honestly, it looks like it is how it was done when it was possibly on CD-ROM before it went to digital content. And perhaps this will be changed with the new database that is being created through Accessible Archives and History Commons. So maybe that's the change that they're going to make. I don't know for certain, but I wanted you to be aware that that's what we're looking at. So if there's a specific newspaper publication that you're wanting to search, you can look through here and find which one it would be. So let's say that you're specifically interested in Freedom's Journal, then you know you're going to be searching in part 1, and you can see what dates are available as well. So you can also scroll down and it's going to give you more information about these different publications and what the holdings are. So knowing that it's complete, excluding 1892, can be helpful, because if you are looking for information for that time period, that 1892, perhaps you're at a loss because of the destruction of the 1890 census and you're trying to fill in a gap and you're hoping that this will help you. Well, you know, that could be really cool. Except maybe that 1892 edition is what you needed. So you need to make sure to check and see what the holdings are anytime you are looking at any sort of publication, so you know what you're searching and that you're not going to be disappointed after spending a lot of time searching through a data collection. It's also really nice to have a background on the different newspapers. And that's something also I provided you background information on in your handout. There's a learn more section that I put a lot of different publications on African American newspapers, and I love being able to look at the history, the historical context, and understanding more information about how different publications came about, or maybe the logic behind them. And I think that's true for any data set as you're doing research for genealogy. You want to know the why. You want to know, why is this important? What information is going to exist in this, and when is this going to be relevant? So you got to look at some of this information. So going through this is incredibly helpful, and you can get here through the database itself. But let's go back. So we have a different part for each publication. Well, let's say we want to search, maybe we want to search all of the Christian recorders. So we see that it's multiple parts. So it's 7 through 12. We can go back here and say, okay, I want 7 through 12. So I used the shift button. I clicked on 7, and then I clicked on shift on my keyboard, and then clicked on 12. And then I can go back up and put in my search term. So I'm going to go ahead and put in manumission as my search term, and I'm going to hit a search. I'm not going to do any other filters. I'm just keeping it very simple. And once I do that, I have different publications here. And so I'm going to go ahead and click on the first one. Okay, so we have it's an article 1859. It has the title of the article, the location. So I have all of this information. Now I have different things that I can do with this article. They're not going to necessarily bring up a picture of it right here. What I can do is I can bring up the page image if that's something I really want. So this is the original. This is actually Douglas's monthly. And I can pull that up and look at the original page and maybe print that out if I need the primary source there, if I need to see it for myself, which I typically do when I'm doing research. It's very nice to have the transcription, the summary. I can go into a print version, and I can print from here, and that'll give me a cleaner looking document. So you can see right here, it looks very nice, and it gives me the citation and all sorts of good pieces of information. All right, I'm gonna get out of there too. I can email it if I want. So I'm gonna open that up in a new tab. So I can email this information to myself or to someone else that I'm researching with. So that is something that is a nice perk of Accessible Archives, and I hope they continue to keep that. And I can also go into the issue contents, so I can see what other pieces of information are in that specific issue and see if there's something else in here that maybe I'm missing. Because when you're looking at newspapers, something that's really important to note is when you are searching for an ancestor or an event, or trying to understand the historical context surrounding your ancestors, or understanding what was going on, what were the societal norms for the time, it can be helpful to read the entire newspaper. Now, not all of us have that time. I completely understand. But there could be something in here that maybe you'd be missing if you didn't read the entirety of the newspaper. So you can see that there's a bunch of different things. And also remember to use different terms. So manumitted or manumission, you can have all sorts of different things that you can search for and have different terms. If you search, another good word that I always give as an example is death. If you're looking for a death, which is a very common thing to search newspapers for, you're going to want to look for death, died, funeral, obit, obituary, burial, wake. Like there's so many different terms that you can use for a death event. And that's what you want to really search as a death event. So if you're looking for a manumission event, you want to look for all sorts of terms that could come about around that. So make sure that you are searching every sort of term that you can think of. Okay, so you can see that there's a little bit of information. I can go to the next document. So that was the first one, and I can just start going through here and seeing what I can find. So next document, and keep going. I can go to a new search. Let's say, okay, that's not exactly what I wanted. I want to actually search maybe all of these. So I want to go through and search all of them, and I'm going to do that. And you can see the limiters over here. Okay, so now it's going to bring back more publications. And also I'll note that there were multiple publications included in some of these. So even though I did Christian Recorder, there's also some other publications included in ones that had the Christian Recorder for some of these parts. So it's good to remember what's actually in some of these publications, some of these collections. So you can do another search in here, and then I'm starting to get different publications here. So London Patriot, interesting. And I can look at any of these. So the little camera tells me that there's an image. I'm going to go ahead and click on this. And let's go ahead and look at the image, because again, you always want to look at that original. And yes, it looks very small. I do want to note that you can zoom in and out. They do have that option here. Unfortunately, because I'm also running Zoom, it's a little bit slow on the in and out. So I'm going to go ahead and refrain from playing with that too much in order to make sure that you guys can see a little bit more within this. Okay, let me go back. All right, so other things that you can do. So we already have a search. I have a search in here. I can narrow results by searching within results. So maybe I'm looking for something specific for Virginia. And so I want to add that word to my search. So I can add another word. And I did add that limiter. So now I can pull up more information and see if it's in here. So I have that Virginia and manumission. So that's actually going to be in the same article. And that's something that I really wanted to come up. And you can see that there's multiple different results. We have 76 at this point, 77 with available with full subscription. I can also filter by the publication date. I can filter by the collection, which I can dive into a little bit further within the descriptor here. I can go into the publication type. It's all newspapers, so not really a big deal, but it gives me just a few more options. Now, something that is really nice that they also supply through one of their help is right here. If I go into help through accessible archives, where's that? Oh, not found. We're going to click on it. It's going to bring up this user manual. And so this has actually been linked in the handout, and this is something that you should be able to access from home. I was able to access this from home, so I would hope that everybody else would. But this is a very in-depth user manual. This goes through every sort of thing that you could possibly want to use while searching accessible archives databases. It has different search terms that you can use. And so what's really interesting is it gives you an example. So if you're searching for Civil War, it's searching for civil and the term war. If you want it in quotes, it'll look for Civil War in the same phrase with the words together. So you can also do a search slavery and Underground Railroad. So you can play around with the different search terms and figure out what's going to be helpful. It's also helpful to have the limiter of not, so you can actually exclude different words as well. So I do recommend playing around with that as well, so you don't have the results that you don't want. So, for example, if you're looking for Underground Railroad, um, dealing with slavery, maybe you want to say, oh, you don't want anything in Canada. You don't want the results from any sort of Canadian newspapers or any sort of articles about Canada. You want specifically for the United States. So you could put Underground Railroad in quotations, not Canada, and that would retrieve those results. You can add different search terms through the advanced options. So we can go back and play around with this. So let's go into a new search, and you can add more search boxes. So you have these different options, and you can start. So let's go ahead and do Underground Railroad, because that's a good example. And let's do not Canada. And so we can use this in two different bars, or you can put it in the same one. And we're going to go ahead and do a search. And this is actually going to go through all of them. I did not limit the collection to African American newspapers. And to be perfectly honest, if you're given the option of having more newspapers, more databases to search, sometimes it can be helpful. Sometimes it can be a hindrance. And honestly, I would highly recommend playing around with it and seeing what works the best for you. And the next database that we're going to look at, I will tell you for certain, you do want to limit which newspapers you're searching. Otherwise, it is 100% overwhelming. So we have, okay, we have the Underground Railroad, a record of facts. We can open that up, and we now have some information. I'm going to go ahead and click on page image so we can see. We have the Christian Recorder here, and it's a nice, beautiful newspaper. So let's go back. And you can see that it did limit having anything about Canada in there. Now let's say, okay, we did want a specific newspaper. Let's say we just wanted this one. It'll then limit those results. And let's say we only wanted 1860s. So you can go specifically in here, 1861, we have a nice article in here. First Underground Railroad. And so this is a very interesting article from the Christian Recorder that you can then use for research. Now, these are just simple terms of events that could be. So let's do a new search and try something different. What if we're looking for a specific person? Let's look for John Benjamin. And actually, his name is John Benjamin McClellan. But let's go ahead and see what we can find. Okay, so the first thing that we're coming up with is we're finding different pieces of information that don't have to do with the African American newspapers. So we may want to go through and start limiting by the newspapers, or we can just scroll through and say, okay, maybe there are pieces of information in here that could be helpful, and you want to look at it. So let's go ahead and click on this, and you can see that it's not searching John Benjamin together. It's searching John or Benjamin. So we need to go back and actually change our search, because that's not giving us the actual search term that we wanted. So we're going to edit and make sure that these are actually together with those quotations. See, that's a really good example. Since they're both first names, you can find a lot of different things with John and Benjamin. Okay, so this is actually the article I was looking for. So we have John Benjamin McClellan of Ohio, and it's going to give the information on the death of this particular person. And it gives a absolute wonderful basically obituary. It gives information about this person. It gives information on the marriage and where he was born and all sorts of wonderful pieces. So this is the type of information that we all want to find for our ancestors, that rich of pieces of information, including where the funeral is and all sorts of pieces. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to go back to new search. Okay, so we have a lot of information in here about how to do research within this collection. And the information in your handout, that user guide, is quite possibly the best thing that you can use for searching within this. Having all of these different symbols, having the phrase searches, truncation, wildcard, proximity searches. So you can make sure that these are all things that could be incredibly helpful with your research. I'm not going to go through every single type because honestly, I would highly recommend going through here because this is such a it's an amazing collection of just ways you can search a collection, and it's specific for accessible archives, but this could be helpful information for any collection you search and learning about the different terms to be even looking for. But it is helpful to have something like this user manual, and you do have access to that in your handout. So the next database that I want to show you, we're going to go back to the Genealogy Center on-site databases. We're going to scroll down to African American historical newspapers. I'm going to X out of these. There we go. So once we're in here, it's searching 13 databases. I'm going to tell you right now, if we look at it, we're supposed to be looking at 9. And also there's a genealogy link that no longer works. So we're looking for 9 distinct newspapers, and we can see which ones they are. So instead of trying to search all of these and figuring out what that is, we're going to go ahead and change databases. And by going in here and selecting off of all of those, because we don't want to search global news stream or coronavirus research database or many of these other things, we want to go down to the ProQuest historical newspapers. So we're looking at the Atlantic Daily, Baltimore Afro-American, the Chicago Defender, the Cleveland Call and Post, the Los Angeles Sentinel, the New York Amsterdam News, the Norfolk Journal and Guide, Philadelphia Tribune, and the Pittsburgh Courier. Those are the ones that are included. Now, if you wanted to, you could just search one of these. If that is the area of the country where your ancestors were from, oh my goodness, use that. That could be the thing that you need to search. So please play around with those different things. But let's go ahead and do some different types of searches. Now, in your handout, I gave you a list of types of records one might find. So these are things that could be helpful as inspiration of things to look for in newspapers. So one of the search terms are information wanted ads. So I'm going to type that in. So I'm going to type it in without actually putting it in quotations, because sometimes it's better to do it in quotations and then not in quotations to see what comes up. But information wanted, this is on family members who are trying to find different people that are missing from their lives. So there's a bunch of different things that you can find. A lot of these are more recent, you can see. And let's see here. If you want something that's a little bit further back in history, going to the accessible archives might be a little bit better, but we can restrict by the time period or the publication title, depending on the time period. We can go into more if we want. And this is a way to restrict the results. But the other thing that you can do is just start to go into different things. So I can click on one of these and it's on information wanted. And you can see that the article's right here. So you can zoom in and out a little bit. You can download it as a PDF. You can cite it, copy the URL, print, and you can see all the different options they have. Saving it to a cloud, you can do a citation export, which is incredibly helpful. I personally like to just save things as PDF and then having it on a flash drive for further research and to have that there. But I also do put things in the cloud, so that could be helpful. This is the full text. You can go into page viewer as well, and this will show the entire newspaper. And again, going through the entire newspaper is sometimes helpful when you are trying to understand more about the time period, more about the historical context, more about what was going on in the world around our ancestors. And then you can also click on the details, and it's going to give you details about the publication and the digitization of it. So having this information can be helpful to come back to. Browsing the issue is also a fun thing to do to understand the historical context as well. So it takes you to the page that you're on. And I love looking at school information. You get such wonderful tidbits on the different school activities that our family members or ancestors participated in, including if they recited poetry or sang or were involved with sports or maybe they got academic honors for something. And I think that's an incredible thing to learn about our ancestors and to explore. So this is something that I would recommend looking at. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back a few times to get back to that search. So another thing to note is if I go back here to those 9 databases, we do have the option to do an advanced search just as well. Very similar to the accessible archives, you have the and or not. You can put things in quotations. You can add a row. So if you have multiple things that you're going to do, so you want to search, maybe you're looking for someone's wedding. So you're looking for the wedding event. So you want to look for wedding and then the surname, not death or not birth. You want a specific life event. So that's something that you can do a search for. Now, one of the things that is helpful is they do have search tips. Click on that again. And these will pop up with this information. Now, the other thing is in your handout, there is a user guide for this collection that is just like this pop-up that we have here that has these search tips. And so I recommend going through this as well. And this is going to be very similar to what you find for accessible archives. Each database is slightly different with how they do their searching and their search terms and how they change things up, but the basic ones are going to be the same, the and or not, looking for using wildcards or truncation, qualifiers, things like that. Those are going to be very similar from database to database. So making sure that you understand what those are and how those can be utilized is incredibly helpful when you're doing research like this in newspapers. Okay, so another thing that we can do, I'm going to go back to basic search. So we can search for people here. I'm going to go ahead and do a search for Amos Smith. And I put it in quotations because I want that to be the actual name. And I can scroll down and see which ones are going to be popping up right now. And let's say, okay, there's a lot of different options. We have 20 different options, and they're sorted by relevance. Okay, that's fine. But perhaps I'm looking for something more specific. Maybe I want it from a specific publication. Well, I can narrow it down by those publication titles. So let's go into the Philadelphia Tribune And let's take a little bit of a closer look and see if this is the specific article that we're looking for. And so now we actually have more information and we can read the article. Now, the weird thing is it does come up sideways like that. You have to scroll over a little bit and play around with the viewer. It doesn't come up very well when you're zooming in and out. So just keep that in mind as you are trying to view something. It's not always going to show up the clearest because they have it on this weird paper. It's almost like they went through each article and put it on a copier and then digitized those, which I find fascinating. Sometimes it can actually be easier to look at from the page view, because then you can actually zoom in a little bit more and play around with, but you still have this over here while you're searching. I do love that they have images in the newspapers. Honestly, advertisements are some of my favorite things to look at because it gives you such a clear view of what society was like, what was important to people, what they were advertising that people buy or consume. So let's go back. Now, let's say that's maybe not the one I wanted to look at. Let's go to a quick view of this one. So what it's going to give us is an abstract, a summary. So it's going to be, okay, so someone is missing person. Okay, so let's see if there's more information here. So this is from 1960, and then you can see, all right, this person is trying to find some family, last heard from in 1916 and 1922. And it gives information about a brother. So you have Moses Amos Smith, Abraham Lincoln Smith, and then a brother, J.S. Smith, and a address and their father's name. So you have a bunch of familial connections right there. So it's very good to find things like this. It's basically genealogical gold. So make sure that you're checking these types of materials out. Now, that's a very quick overview of these couple of databases from our collection, the Accessible Archives and the African American Historical Newspapers. But something that I put on your handout that I think is incredibly important to note is that the Library of Congress has a directory of U.S. newspapers in American libraries. And so there's a listing of what libraries hold what newspapers. So if you're looking for a specific newspaper and you want to get your hands on it, many times these are on microfilm still. Maybe they haven't been digitized yet, but you can find which libraries have it. And that can be absolute gold in knowing that they exist and how to find them. Another thing they have is Chronicling America. So this is an online collection. These are newspapers that have been digitized. So you can search within here. You can do an advanced search. You can say which newspaper you want to search. So here's a couple African American newspapers. You have actually many of them right here in a row from different locations, and you can search them for free through Chronicling America. And this is just an excellent resource for anybody doing genealogical research and using newspapers. You can go here to all digitized newspapers. You can say you want a specific state. So let's go to New York. And let's say we want African American newspapers and go. And so now it's going to tell us what publications exist for New York that are African American. And it gives you the earliest issue and latest issue and lets you know if there's more info. You can browse them. So click on that. And it looks like we just have this one issue right here. So I'm going to click on that. And then it's going to give you information and you can play around with this. So, you know, yeah, I know we covered some newspapers that are very specific to our collection and physically being on site, but I do want to give you options for finding newspapers from home as well, because I think that is incredibly important. And I do recognize that many of you are not physically here and aren't able to physically come to the library on a regular basis. And that's understandable, but we do hope that you will come and use our databases, which is why we wanted to have this presentation and why we wanted to talk about these different publications. So this is one option, and I put it in your handout, but another option that I think is just as vitally important is going and saying, okay, the newspaper that I am the most interested in is, let's say, the Chicago Defender. Let's say that's the one that has information that I am seeking. I would take that, open up Google, put it in quotations, and then put online newspaper and see what you can find, because you never know what's been digitized and where it's going to be. So it looks like there is a publication of that name online. We have a link to PBS. We have a link to the Library of Congress. So we will also want to do some different searches. So digital newspaper. So this is still bringing that up. And then you want to do different terms. So digital, and let's instead do historic. So then we have archives and permissions. So let's see what this brings up. So this tells you that they're on ProQuest, and you know that. And then the back issues, so real times media. So it's going to be a little bit harder to find that information knowing that I have an agreement with ProQuest, but that doesn't also mean that they're only there. So you want to make sure that you are checking different places as well. Full page and article. So that's who they worked with, the Chicago Defender. That doesn't mean those are the only ones that are online, because you want to look at the publication date. So it starts with 1910 and it goes to 75. So I can tell you that the years that are within copyright, you won't be able to find online, but that 1910 should be online somewhere. So this even says 1905. Oh, ProQuest. So you want to play around with different options and see what you can find. So perhaps you are going to be able to find it online and maybe not. It's completely up to the publication. And you want to make sure that you can find it. So this one is library card required. So that's going to be under a paywall. So knowing that you might be able to find it, and a lot of these are under ProQuest because ProQuest is very good at taking things down, but you might be able to find different specific issues for early ones. So perhaps if we have a specific date of 1910, that might bring up more information and let us actually see some articles. Here's an image of one. So that could be helpful. You want to play around and see what other resources are out there. So make sure that you are playing around and trying to find different options for finding these newspapers. Is it 100%? No. Is it hard, especially if ProQuest has them? Yes. I will not pretend, but there are options, and I wanted to make sure that you guys knew that there are potentially other options. You can potentially get newspapers on microfilm and interlibrary loan to your local library. Make sure to talk to your local librarian about that. But there are a bunch of options out there, and I hope you were able to get access to the newspapers that you were interested in.